All right, how you doing? Let's take this away. Sorry about that. I was just messing around with the old live feeds there. So let me take it away. This is Highway to High Road. The episode number 10, Transitions. And those were with Mr. Trevor Ramos. Fine young man. That I will now introduce you to. So here goes the episode introduction. A couple of times. In episode number 9, we talked about applications to boarding school. That was a raunchy beginning. Let me start again. In episode 9, we talked about applications to boarding schools and the distinctions and idiosyncrasies in this process. Today, we turn our attention back to college application and specifically to considering how to obtain large amounts of for increasingly expensive college tuition. Okay, try that again. Bumblebee. Turn attention back to college. Okay. In episode 9, we talked about applications to boarding schools and the distinctions and idiosyncrasies in this process. Today, we turn our attention back to college application and specifically consider how to obtain large amounts of scholarship funding for increasing expensive college tuition. I'm excited to be joined today by Trevor Ramos, college funding consultant and author of the book, How to Get Free Money for College. Get the insights of a college scholarship genius who helped 400 families get over $14 million in free money that never has to be paid back. Trevor is an expert at finding scholarships and shotgunning ways to obtain this money for college tuition as the price of higher education creeps steadily upwards. In 12 years of service, Trevor has helped over 400 families get accepted to the top colleges in America for pennies on the dollar by helping students get free money grants and scholarships, over $12 million. Trevor, welcome to the show. Let me take that one more time. In episode 9, we talked about applications to boarding schools and the distinctions and idiosyncrasies in this process. Today, we turn our attention back to college application and specifically consider how to obtain large amounts of scholarship funding for increasingly expensive college tuition. I'm excited to be joined today by Trevor Ramos, college funding consultant and author of the book How to Get Free Money for College. Get the insights of a college scholarship genius who helped over 400 families get $14 million in free money that never has to be paid back. Trevor is an expert at finding scholarships and shotgunning ways to obtain this money for college tuition as the price of higher education creeps steadily upwards. In 12 years of service, Trevor has helped over 400 families get accepted to the top colleges in America for pennies on the dollar by helping students get free money grants and scholarships, over $12 million. Trevor, welcome to the show. Trevor. Okay, I think that's fair enough. Okay, so I'm going to go straight to first, that first set of transitions. And pull that up very stealthily. Okay, so segment 1, transitions. Right there. Okay. Bear with me. Really slow. Really slow. Okay. All right, here we go on the transitions. Number 1. Here are a couple of thoughts that stuck out to me after the first segment of my conversation with Trevor. There's a college situation for all people in all budgets. Sounds fairly obvious, but I think people make a lot of assumptions about college and about affordability that are not always accurate. What you can afford and what your teenager is actually capable of is wise to give some consideration to ahead of time, to be able to wed those two things, to be able to wed the expectations, going into it from the top, and what the student is actually going to be able to do, where they would be able to thrive, where they're actually going to make it, because attrition is a real risk. Dropout is a very real risk. 30% of kids don't make it to their sophomore year in this country. So having some foresight about that, getting some guidance, to me, it seems like a very good investment of time and resources. The element of backwards planning also stuck out to me in this conversation. Thinking about what your budget is, what you can afford, before you start sending out applications for scholarships before you try the whole sort of spaghetti, sticking to the wall method of locating funding for your student is about as effective as doing that on a general college admission basis. Yeah, I mean, sometimes the spaghetti does actually stick to the wall, but there's a far more efficient ways of going about that, where you might end up with results that are a lot better. Results that are better in terms of how successful the student is at that particular college, and also what type of school they get into, because let's face it, the quality of the degree does matter. That I consider part of that equation as well. So all the more reason to have a bit of guidance about that whole thing. At the very least, putting a lot of thought into the direction you're going to go, the plans for the building before you start laying down the mortar. Okay. Let's go to the second transitions. Here are a couple of things that stuck out to me in the second segment with Trevor. Number one, it's a very complex picture if you step back and look at the budgeting for school on a national stage in the contemporary situation that we're in with the pandemic. But following where the money is being funneled by the government can give you some hints. Programs are initially sort of laid out, like the PPP loans, the SBA disaster loans, Main Street loans, that pushed all the money into the private industry and swung the pendulum very heavily towards private schools, private colleges, even. They really gained an advantage over sort of public institutions because of all of that funding, if you follow the dollars. And private schools, even on a high school basis, became far superior to public schools, or at least we're trending in that direction. I'm speaking in generalities there, but certainly something to consider. But the pendulum has somewhat swung back in the other direction since there's been such an emphasis on public funding in the last year or so. Where might that be next fall? I think that matters. Where those dollars are going, particularly if you're looking at scholarship money and grant money. Where is there going to be an excess? Where is there going to be more generosity? Perhaps that's a fairly obvious point, but it seems to be evolving so quickly that I think it's important to have a sharp view of that right now. The other point that stuck out to me in that second segment was the huge distinction that there is between in-state tuition versus out-of-state tuition for public colleges, particularly in the case of UC schools, which are excellent universities. I mean, first class education, real quality degree. But that discrepancy between how much you're going to be paying in state versus out of state matters. Also, it's a heck of a lot harder to get in, out of state in terms of the admission rates. So that is something to weigh, based on where you live. If you're living in California, you're feeling pretty good about your options in terms of public public colleges. Perhaps in another state, not so much. So you should take that into account when you're trying to determine which schools to apply to and which schools are going to be affordable too. And the final takeaways. Here are my final thoughts after my conversation with Trevor. Number one, to me, that really stuck out. Perhaps that's my situation in particular. I have a 9-year-old daughter, but scholarships are not just for those with household incomes under a certain income level. We talked about 200,000 per year per household. Trevor suggested that millions of dollars of scholarships exist for well-qualified candidates over this income level, particularly for more competitive schools. So I think the tendency is, if you're sort of over a certain threshold of household income, to kind of ignore scholarships and grants. And man, is that a huge mistake. Those opportunities are certainly out there, and it's not necessarily all just based on need. If the student is really, really well qualified to go to that school, then there may actually be at least some aid available to them to do that. So certainly something worth looking into and not abandoning based on your income level. The second thing that stuck out to me in my conversation with Trevor was that it's important to get an early start on these things. That's true of all financial planning, of course. I think I worked it out, and if I had, saved $1,000 at age 20 and then retired at 65, followed that rule of 72, where your money essentially doubles every year. If you're getting an 8% return on the stock market, which is what you expect, that I would have $64,000. So for every $1,000 I saved at 2020, I would have 64,000 by the time you hit retirement. That is a startling figure, mostly for what I've missed. But if this is an old adage that I'm sure is unfamiliar to very few, but it certainly matters in college planning and also in terms of college scholarship planning. Now, on a basic level, you have, of course, 529, so the modest amount of college funding that you can put aside for your child in a tax deductible way. That's wise. But starting to think about avenues for grants and scholarships, even a few years in advance, when your child's a freshman or sophomore even, that's just going to put you ahead of the game in half a dozen different ways. So, I think that's something that's really important to get in there early and not sort of save this for when they're 18. One final point that Another point that stuck out to me overall about the conversation with Trevor was that backwards planning really makes this a much more efficient process overall and leads to a much better result. And by backwards planning, I mean financially what you're going to be able to afford and what the kids actually going to be able to do academically and personally. Might sound easy, but I think it's actually difficult to be honest about both of those things. Uh, you know, financially, I think there's a tendency to not really want to be all that transparent or forthright with our children because we want to protect them from uh, some of the hairiness of financial life that uh, you know don't necessarily want to expose them to at a younger age. But I think there are some basic ways that you can communicate what's going to be possible without maybe getting into some of the nitty gritty details. Uh, and certainly, if not with them, with a professional that's going to be able to help you, like Trevor. The other thing is, I think it's difficult to be honest about our kids and their shortcomings. We are so often eager to believe in what they can do and are loath to accept sort of their shortcomings and where they might struggle. So, that's not to say that we should always, throw them under the bus and see them for their worst selves. Absolutely not. I mean, parents, we love them. We want to see them as their best selves. But in making these plans, I think you do need to have a bit more of a balanced view about what's possible. So, you can shoot for those highly competitive environments, but still be realistic about what you expect from them in terms of production once they get there. How well are they actually going to fit in there? It's great that you want them to have that degree, but will they actually get that degree, and what will they look like 10 years down the road afterwards? Okay. All right. I think that is all, my friends. And best of luck.